Welcome. I'm J. Michael Silver, and this is Foundational Steps, the show where I talk with people about the choices they make in life and how they get where they are now. In this episode, I'm talking with Kathryn Valias. She is the founder of Mistfit Investors, Misfit Mindset and Luvi.Life. We talk about her career as a ballet dancer, entrepreneurship, leadership, and so many other amazing things. If you're looking for a role model, Katy fits the bill in every way, from business to parenting. Timestamps and links for Katy can be found in the show notes. Please support the show by leaving a comment or a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Check out our affiliate links. You might find something cool and valuable. Enjoy our conversation. Awesome. Well, hello.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
So good to be here.
Yeah, no, it's good to see you again as well. I know we said that earlier when we first, connected on here, and it is funny how time flies because you and your husband were out here over a year ago now.
Oh my God, is that true?
I think so.
Oh, we were there in April.
April of 2021.
End of April 2021. Yeah,
Okay, so not quite a year then.
quite a year, but it feels like it's been longer.
Yeah, I was trying to think. I was like, was it 2020 or was it 2021?
Yeah.
The time's just like flying by.
What happened?
Yeah, and maybe we'll probably touch on some of it, I would imagine. So you were, before I hit record, you were about to tell me about your philosophy with leadership.
Yeah.
And I would love to just start off with that.
So the way that I position myself as a leader in my life and in the businesses that I create is through my fundamental core values, which is honesty, integrity, a willingness to grow and listen. And within those, it's my driving force to also embody transparency and vulnerability. Because I see so many people who step into a leadership role and they don't embody a full human. They don't even allow themselves to be in a position where if they make a mistake, they can have any integrity to fix it or to own up to it.
It's like they're creating a one-dimensional persona, or maybe a two-dimensional persona. Maybe there's a little bit more than the one dimension going on. And that cardboard cutout is somehow or another in their mind sufficient. Like they've only thought that far.
Exactly. Or they're positioning themselves on a pedestal instead of welcoming themselves onto the same playing field as the people that they're trying to lead.
Yep.
And meeting them eye to eye and leading them on the right path to build momentum for whatever movement they're trying to create in this world.
Yep.
So I believe that transparency and authenticity are two ways to maintain that level without putting yourself on a pedestal that eventually you're going to fall from.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's that old taking yourself too seriously thing. If you take yourself too seriously, then the moment the moment you trip, all of a sudden it's a travesty. So just simply tripping, when you're overly serious and overly everything kind of falls apart and the entire facade is gone. I used to, it's so funny, it's such a random connection, but I used to teach dance many years back. And my favorite people to work with were ballet dancers, because ballet dancers were so refined and they were so perfect in their movements, every, foot and hand and, whatever. And I was working with them from expressive dance, modern dance, contact improvisation. And so, the exact opposite of perfect. And ballet dancers, if they're not well rehearsed in whatever it is they're doing, there's going to be glitches. So as soon as they're trying to break form, they were the clumsiest group of people. And it was so amazing because in that clumsiness, when they owned it, they were so much more vibrant or charismatic, because they owned their awkwardness, and it just became magical. And it
Yep.
was my favorite thing to see. And not all of them were able to own it, but the ones that did, it was magical.
So I actually did ballet for a very long time.
Oh, that's funny.
I
I
had
don't think I knew
started,
that.
no worries. I had started when I was 3, and I ended my career when I was 17. And I got to do some incredible performances.
Wow.
I went to Berlin and tried out for an academy there.
Wow.
Things, didn't get it. That's fine.
That's okay. Yeah. Still, I
Yeah.
mean, just to be able to be good enough to go there, I mean, that's an accomplishment in and of itself.
Yeah. And it was a great experience. But one of my favorite things was actually during rehearsal, if somebody would mess up, if they would fall, if they were clumsy, because usually a lot of us would just laugh it off. And maybe that's just the environment that I was in and the people that I was dancing with. And maybe I got really lucky. But seeing that laughter and knowing that, like, behind the scenes, like, our feet are bleeding, we're hungry, our everything hurts. We have trained to the point where most people would break.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, most people do break, don't they? I mean, they don't make it. They don't get that far.
it's true. Not a lot of people do. But there's an amount of discipline that you have to have, where this passion that is inside of you outweighs the pain that you are going through.
Mm,
And to still be able to find moments of joy within that, I think is magical.
absolutely.
And you see it from a lot of dancers. The joy, the bliss that they get from doing what they love, even if behind the scenes, it's not like that.
Yeah. No,
And
there's something that happens when you're in the zone, you're in the flow, in that flow state. And it's like everything else disappears. And my first experience with that was when I was a kid. I was training in Taekwondo, and I was doing junior Olympic state competitions and so forth. And I never had any interest in taking it beyond that or trying to go to the Olympics or anything like that. But there was something when you're in that zone, you could get knocked down, you could get kicked in the face, and there was no pain. There is no experience of anything other than that just happened because I let my guard down, or because I didn't, move this way fast enough, or, kick fast enough, or spin fast enough, or whatever. And it just becomes a, strategic, information. So the pain is more, it's just information to say, oh, I messed up, or maybe I didn't mess up. You kick someone, it can really hurt your foot too. So, but depending on how that you're experiencing that pain, like different types of pain mean different things. And it could be like, oh, I nailed that, or it could mean, oh, I really screwed up. And when you're in that flow state and when you're in that zone, it's not like stubbing your toe on the coffee table where you're like in pain and nearly crying for for the dumbest little incident.
yep, that's true. I think there's a lot that you can learn from understanding that flow state if you've been connected with your body
Yeah.
that way, because it can translate into so many other things that you want to do in your life. And understanding what that flow state really feels like. understanding the discipline that it takes to really get there, whether it's
Mm.
meditation or hyper focus on a new subject or whatever it may be for you.
Yeah, I'm curious. We're going to probably do this for the entire time, scroll around, but um, you said meditation or hyper focus. And I'm just so curious because I know you have a good background, and meditation and mindfulness and breathing has been something for me my entire life journey. So I'm so curious, what's your perspective on the difference between meditation and hyperfocus? And how do you like, where's the delineation? Where does one stop being the other, or,
So I guess I categorize them as a different mental state. And
okay.
that primarily is because I am neurodivergent.
Mm-hmm.
I have ADHD, I'm unmedicated. So
You said you're unmedicated, you're medicated.
I'm unmedicated.
Yeah. I've
And
definitely self-medicated over the years, but
I'm not sure if it helped very much.
ultimately for me, everything that helps truly is about the physical, the mental, the breathing, it's the mindfulness, it's the medication, whether it's self-medicated or from friends that I've seen that are full-time medicated. It's just a Band-Aid, and it doesn't really help you. And it's maybe a good bridge. Like, I've definitely needed those bridges at times, but it's not sustainable.
Exactly. The only thing that I have found that was really sustainable actually has been meditation, but I use different forms of meditation based on what I'm trying to achieve. And that can be anything from like hypnagogic state meditation. If I really feel like I'm so overwhelmed that no creativity is really coming through. And hypnagogic meditation is actually something that Einstein used to use. It's a state between awake and sleeping. And being able to actually fine tune being in that state and receiving those unfiltered creative messages from your subconscious.
Yeah.
And once you start to get to a point where you can recognize that you're in that state, have these experiences of more open-mindedness, more of that dropping of the veil between conscious and subconscious mind, you can pop yourself out of it and start writing down notes. Some people will actually hold marbles in their hand, and when they start to feel themselves drifting off, the marbles will drop and they'll wake themselves up and immediately start writing down whatever it is that they got from that
That's
state.
a cool technique. I know Steve Jobs and some other innovative people and visionary people use hypnagogic meditative states for creative thinking. Engineers, it's very common with engineers. How do you, I mean, I know some of this personally, but from our previous conversations and everything else, but I would love for you to explain a little bit or get into how you first knew that you were doing that, because I'm guessing you're probably doing that from a young age. But at what point in time were you like more conscious of it, and then able to have a little bit more of an academic approach to it from a consistency and a repeatable standpoint?
Let's see. I believe that when I was younger, I was really good at getting into these meditative states. I didn't recognize what I was doing. But as the pressure to perform in life and become an adult started to really impact my mind, I lost the ability to be that present and to recognize what was happening. And this is also a point where I was self-medicating pretty aggressively with alcohol and other substances.
Right.
And I think that it did impact my way of recognizing what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
It actually wasn't until I had another business that I was going to start in 2020, and I had worked on it for a few years. We were so close to launching. We were actually going to launch on April 1st, 2020. And kind of the running joke is that, well, joke's on us.
Yeah. April Fools. Whoops.
Yep. And I had hit a really, really, really dark period in my life. I had poured my absolute soul into this business.
Mm.
And when I saw it all come crashing down within a matter of weeks, like,
Do you want to just for anyone listening, do you want to give a quick overview of what that business is or was?
let me do that after I kind of explain this.
Okay, cool.
So when watching something that I had put so much money, so much time, so much effort, so much of that adulting brain into, it hurt me, like physically, mentally. I was destroyed.
Yeah, I bet.
And I started drinking more. I ended up having to let my entire team know, my software team, everyone know, like, we can't push forward. I've tried every avenue. And then there was this moment where I was like, what am I doing? Like, just because I lost one business, my other business is still running. I suddenly had given up on life. I had given up on creativity. I had given up on everything. And that is so sad. It's so sad to have one thing that destroys you mentally and takes away all of your creativity. It creates this void within you that you sometimes can't even recognize is happening. You're sheerly existing. You're not doing anything. And when I realized, like, my mind, my creativity, my essence that I can bring to the world is way more important than this wallowing self-pity that I had decided, because that was a choice, to throw myself into. And that's when I started getting back into meditation. That's when I really started to understand that I needed to get back to where I was when I was younger, and having those rapid fire creative thoughts and self-love and understanding of self.
I mean, that commend you for that, because it's amazing and not easy. I think it's unfortunately common for people to have that one thing that, wrecks them like that. I wish that was an anomaly. But I've seen it. I've just seen it too many times. I've experienced it, for periods of time, in my past. And yeah, but I'm curious. It sounds like it was a long time between, you were, when you were younger, being, getting into the meditative states, and when you had that moment. I'm getting a message. The internet's unstable. Everything looks fine. Okay. And then recently, when you had that kind of call to come back to yourself through the meditation and so forth, was that as long as it sounds period of time, or how many years was it roughly?
Ooh. Probably about 5 years.
And
Yeah.
so at some point in time, so I mean, because you're, I don't want to get into the age thing, but you're a mom, you have 2 kids, you're married, so the adulting took you away from your meditation when you were an adult then. So it wasn't like after dance, at 17, you had a fall from all of that. You maintained
My childlike sense for a long time.
Yeah.
I guess it was actually right around the age of 25.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about that pinpoint in life is that's actually when they say your frontal lobe fully develops.
Mm-hmm.
So for a lot of people, it becomes harder to actually access that more open-minded state because now your brain has a more concrete idea of self. And prior to 25, you're still very malleable. Like your ability for retraining your brain and accessing that like rapid neuroplasticity is monumental in comparison to when you're in your 30s.
Yeah.
Like right now, I'm 32 and I still feel like I'm battling the storyline that I'm not as malleable because there are ways, like even through other types of meditation, to really get back to that ability to have intense neuroplasticity and rewire your brain, rewire your subconscious, and have new perceptions in life.
For sure. I mean, the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT is one of my favorite go-to for, if someone says that they're having a difficult time and they're looking, they need therapy or they need, guidance or they need, and it's not as simple as just learning a new skill or being held accountable. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I think, is one of the most profound tools. And there's new systems that are incredibly helpful as well. But it basically says, let's create actions, and then that will create change and create the neuroplasticity needed to, to break through to the other side. And it's something that I think if you want to do it on your own, you can do it, but you have to have a pretty strong mindfulness practice to be able to not judge yourself and feel and hear and see what you're saying, doing, so that you can make note of it. Oh, I did that again. Oh, I did that again. Oh, now I'm thinking about this, so that you can then create some behavioral changes around that. But if you don't have that mindfulness practice, then you have to have help. You have to have outside help. And, your mindfulness practice can be pretty profound in a matter of 4 weeks. I mean, literally, they've done testing now that they know in 4 weeks with 12 minutes a day that you can change your ability to focus. You can de-stress yourself, sleep better. They're using with active military. It's amazing. So I don't want to go too far off on that tangent. It's a whole nother thing. So when you had this wake up call, and when you had this experience, did you first go inward, or did you go outward to find techniques or skills or tools or therapists or other help?
Kind of both. Like I had already been in therapy for about 8 years. And actually a lot of it was cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
And I do feel like it helped a lot. But when I had that initial kind of Phoenix moment where I was like, I need to rebirth myself. I need to burn off everything. And I need to become this next version of myself.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I immediately knew that I needed another mentor. I didn't even know exactly what the next business I was going to be starting was going to be. Because at that point, my other business, the one that I had had for 8 years, had failed and was not, I couldn't recover it in 2020. There was no way. And so I guess by August 2020, I had lost my startup and then I had lost my foundational business. And the only thing that I knew was at that point, I needed to find another mentor. I needed to find another path, because any business mentor that I was going to connect with, I can still take a lot of their teachings and still apply it to other businesses.
Absolutely.
But my original mentor, I had surpassed her in some ways in terms of the knowledge that I needed for that next level of growth.
Mm-hmm.
So mentorship was the first order of business, at least from what I believed.
Mm-hmm.
Second order of business was actually getting more into NLP. And neuro-linguistic programming, I really love, because it doesn't teach you just focus on your actions, change your actions. When you get down to the root of it, it's find the thought that is creating the emotion that then transpires into the action.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can disrupt the thought and dissect that thought and figure out if it's real, if it's truthful, and even if it's helpful, you can dig into that thought and even try to find a storyline that you might be subconsciously living out that is completely inaccurate.
Right.
It could be an internal narrative or a storyline that was perpetuated on you when you were young by your parents or peers or society, or even from yourself based on your childhood experiences and the perception that you had in certain situations that you have the cognitive ability to really understand. So you created a storyline, which then became a thought that might have actually caused mass amounts of damage to the progress that you wanted to make in your life.
Yep.
So find that thought, and then you can write out a neutral thought, something to replace it, not something overly positive where you're like, okay, I think I'm fat because of blah, blah, blah. Instead of going the complete opposite and saying like, well, actually I'm beautiful and like blah, blah, blah. You can go more for the neutral thought of, this is my body.
Mm-hmm.
This is an amazing body that has allowed me the ability to have extremely powerful and wonderful experiences in life.
Mm-hmm.
Do I fit this narrative? No, I don't. And that's okay. And retraining yourself to a neutral thought, which then creates neutral feelings about some of your body image.
It's so interesting that you call that neutral, because to me, that's incredibly positive and hopeful and bright. And it's exactly like beautiful. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So I'm beautiful. Well, are you beautiful to yourself? Are you talking, someone else? Like for like women, for instance, I've never met a woman that wasn't hit on, wasn't sexually harassed, wasn't sexually accosted.
Yep.
And not all the women are classically beautiful or whatever that means, or fit into the box of, supermodel or even plus size model in some cases, yet they've still been hit on, they've still been, harassed. So someone is finding them attractive, someone is being attracted to them. That means, so like the idea of someone saying, I'm beautiful, well, that makes you feel great. But I don't know where the utility is in that, where the utility of saying, like, this body's amazing because it's gotten me through this. It's given me the ability to experience this, or it's been kind enough to put up with, this behavior, or whatever you've put it through. Like, that's amazing. That's, there's value there.
Well, I think fundamentally there's a big difference between the environment versus our sense of self. A lot of people are living with this perception that they're kind of the little person behind the eyes, experiencing things, but separate from their environment. And when the environment is telling you one thing, and especially when it's an environment for a lot of women, getting hit on, especially now, is extremely triggering because you never know where the intention lies.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also be very caught up in your mind with your own storylines and this idea of self and not fully connecting to self. That can lead you to a lot of skepticism about what is happening in your environment.
Right.
And I think especially for women, we never really know because we are perpetually told that we need to look a certain way, that we need to act a certain way, that we need to have something that we don't have. And no matter who the woman is, whether they're the most beautiful woman in the world or a woman who feels like she is not the most beautiful woman in the world,
Mm-hmm.
neither one is ever going to be good enough for the standards that are placed on us. So that's why I say neutral thoughts. And yes, maybe some of those neutral thoughts can still be seen as toxic positivity. But when you see how drastic the toxic positivity is that is perpetuated daily from people who are mindfulness coaches, you can see that those can be unrealistic standards versus saying, I appreciate myself just for being.
It's
For
really, it's a really, you're, there's so much, so much there to dig into, because I hear what you're saying, and it's interesting, like this whole toxic positivity thing, like the concept of toxic positivity is linguistically a yes, that's the word. And so it's either positive or it's not. It's either on or it's off. So that's binary thinking, right? And as soon as we get into which is binary is one dimensional, it's left, right, up, down. As soon as we get into two dimensionality, then all of a sudden there's more options, and it's easier to see gradation at that point in time. And the experience of toxic positivity is a gradation of this person's trying to do something that they think is positive and helpful, and this person, because of whatever reason, is not accepting of this person. And so there's a polarity that's the repelling of the polarity of the two poles. Does that track?
I think maybe our perception of toxic positivity is coming from two different lenses. Because
Okay.
when I think more about toxic positivity, I'm thinking a lot more about a lot of the gurus that you see out there who maybe read How to Win Friends and Influence People
Right.
from a very superficial layer.
Yes.
I will say, like, Dale Carnegie and How to Win Friends and Influence People is actually one of my favorite books. But only by the time that I read it, probably the third time, because I could see that it wasn't perpetuating toxic positivity. It was actually a reframing of expectations
Mm-hmm.
and how to understand fundamentally that the expectations that you have are more of the issue, and the expectation of others than kind of what's being packaged and sold to us as you just need to smile more. Try to be positive in everything that you do. If you want to influence X amount of people, you need to have a smile on your face and you need to be overly positive and optimistic. And that's an unrealistic goal.
Well, it's also a lie. I mean, it's just a flat out lie.
Exactly. And
Because
that's where the toxicity of it comes from. Because when you have so many people that are perpetuating that idea, that to manipulate people into believing that because of your words, because of your actions, because of your smile, you can be happy. And that's how happiness is achieved.
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. So to me, that's not toxic positivity. That's just a lie. So like,
Yeah.
there's nothing positive about a lie. Lies can be useful for, not dealing with things, for avoiding things, for trying to forget something. But that also maybe there's a time and place to forget things. There's a time and place to ignore things. It's like, I can't deal with that right now. So you compartmentalize it. So, that kind of all falls into the same area over here where, the negative can have value, time and place. But I mean, my mind immediately went to stand-up comics, when you're talking about the smile and, winning people over and everything, because some of, like, Stephen Wright, do you know who Stephen Wright is?
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah, you would know his voice probably immediately. He's the most droll voice. He kind of talks monotone and doesn't, there's not any affectation. And that's not a good impression of Stephen Wright for any Stephen Wright fans that might be listening. That is not my impression, but I just and I don't think he ever smiles. I don't think he laughs. He's so droll and so depressed. I mean, you could almost say that he comes off as clinically depressed, and a matter of fact, yet he's hilarious and people love him. And he's so charming and charismatic in that, again, going back to ownership of, your awkwardness or whatever, the ballet dancers that I used to work with, and how it made them more authentic and made them more charismatic. People who, like, one of these days I've created a course for teaching charisma, and I mean, it's pretty straightforward. One of these days I'll actually put it out to the world, and I'm working on an ebook for it right now. But it's simply about embracing who you are, and no one can tell you who you are. You know who you are. No one else does. They have a perception of you. They have an idea of you. They can foist, things on you, but only you know. If you want to be droll or drab, then you can be charismatic and droll and drab all at the same time. Like,
Yeah.
that's a reality. How to win friends and influence people. You said you read it 3 times before you loved it. Why did you read it a second time? Because to me, I'll just, for whatever it's worth, that book to me symbolizes an old ideology that says the title is the only thing that matters, and we're going to, we're going to give you skills. You don't have to dig. You don't have to become a whole person. We're just going to give you skills. It's the poster child for the fake world we live in today.
Yep.
And I do believe there's depth there. I do believe he had sincere intentions, and I do believe everything he was trying to do and says in that book has the deeper level that you're talking about.
Yep.
But it's got a lot of baggage now.
I have to pause actually for just one moment.
Okay.
I think my husband put the dogs in the house. So can you pause the video?
Oh yeah, it's getting, yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, so we're back. Okay, so dogs are taken care of. Tell me why you read Win Friends and Influence People a second and a third time, and why you didn't like it at all the first time.
So my perception of the book had been based around other people's perceptions. And it's kind of like hearing from your friend group that they hate their best friend's new girlfriend. And so you meet her and you immediately have judgment.
Yeah.
And maybe the first time that you meet her, you see some silver lining. You're like, I still don't really like her because of everything that everybody's told me about her. Yeah. But I'm kind of curious. And then you hang out with her more. And then she becomes a part of the friend group. And then you really start to enjoy the person that she is, because you see so much more of that person versus those snap judgments and perceptions that you had. There is a story in Win Friends and Influence People that when I first read it, I couldn't believe that it was in the book and nobody talks about it. And it's Dale Carnegie talking about his perception of his son and how he's not living up to these expectations of an adult. Getting mad at him for getting his school clothes dirty by jumping in a puddle. And holding him to these standards that are unrealistic for children.
Yep.
And that was a problem within himself. His perception of his son and what standards his son should be upholding was an issue with himself. And that he can't hold a child accountable to adult expectations. That child just needs to be loved. That child needs to be given a safe space to make mistakes and compassionately be guided. And the second time, or when I decided to go back and read that book a second time, all I wanted to do was open up that book and just read that one story again.
Oh, so your second time reading the book was really just for that one story.
But when I opened up the book, I had that mindset of like, well, you know, I read through the entire book the first time and I got a lot from it. Some things that I actually applied to my own life. But the second time going into it, it was because I wanted to read that story. But I figured, why not just start from the beginning and just read through the entire thing again? And the second time that I read it, it was completely different. It was like reading a completely different book, because that first time I had taken little nuggets and I had started to switch my mindset. And there was other books that I had read in between.
Sure. That
further refined my mindset and my core values and a greater understanding of self. So by the second time that I read it, I was a different person with a different perception. And then by the third time that I read it, it was actually just
how much time took place between the first reading and the second reading? Like how many years you think?
It was probably about a year.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the third time that I read it, it was actually because of Napoleon Hill. I really love Napoleon Hill. I love his Think and Grow Rich book, but that's not the one that really made me fall in love with Napoleon Hill. It was actually Outwitting the Devil that really hit home for me and my perception of Napoleon Hill.
What was it that hit home? What was it that made you go, oh, Napoleon Hill? Because I've never read that book.
Outwitting the Devil is an incredible book. And it talks about the natural order and the natural flow of life,
Mm.
and how you are not separate from the natural flow. You are within that natural flow. And the more that you can stay within that flow in life and make decisions based on the intention that you're putting out,
Yep.
you are going to reach your goals, and you're going to become a more fulfilled person, and you're going to experience more in your life than if you follow a formula that somebody else has created for you, or that society has created for you and told you is the truth, that goes against the natural flow. I highly recommend reading the book because it really puts into perspective people that are drifters, people who are spoken to, have no critical thought, and just do as they're told, versus somebody who's able to find sense of self and follow their intuition and follow the intentions that they're really putting out there into the world and thinking for themselves along the process. But Napoleon Hill talks a lot about Dale Carnegie. So after reading Outwitting the Devil, then it was another moment to go back and look at that perception.
Right.
Because now I basically had a friend who put Dale Carnegie into a different light yet again. And going back and forth, and then also reading more contemporary authors as well, really, really helps you understand that you can have one perception and it might be accurate at that time. But the more knowledge and the more open-minded you can be, you can see everything else in a different perception.
Yeah. So interesting connected story in a weird way. A friend of mine was applying to med school a few years ago. And I asked her if she wanted help with the essays or, the interview process or whatever. And she said, yeah, sure. And so I read her paper that she was sending to all the schools as her introduction, because on paper, academically, she looked great. And there's so many great things, but she wasn't getting in anywhere. And so I read her paper and I said, this is a really interesting quote. And I love it. Who is it? And she said, and I mean, he was credited. It was properly, whatever. But who is this guy? Because I've never heard of him before. And for this good of a quote, there must be a reason why I've never heard of him before. And we did a quick search. And I asked her, I was like, how'd you find it? She was like, I don't know. I just found the quote and I love the quote. And so I wanted to use it. It was very apropos. I'm like, all right, great. So we do a search and immediately it comes up like he's a white supremacist KKK founder, Klan, wizard guy. And I was like, holy Jesus, like, holy mother of all, like, you can't use this quote. Like, I don't care how brilliant it is. I don't care where it comes from. No one's going to dig into, like, they're going to like this quote and they're going to go, who is this person? I've never heard of him before. And they're going to see that. They're not going to care about anything else. You're gone, because the world we live in is facades. And the facades that are created have to be painted or wallpapered in a very specific light, because no one's going below that. And if the first layer is KKK white supremacist, they don't care what you mean. They just assume that that's the brush you paint with.
Yep.
And that's not who she is in any way, shape, or form. And if it was, then she wouldn't be she wouldn't be a doctor, and she wouldn't apply to the schools that she was applying to, and she wouldn't have had all the other amazing work that she was doing. Anyways, she's amazing. And we found a better quote. There's a few other little tweaks and so forth, but nothing major, and she I think she had like 2 or 3 schools left, and she got into all of them. And she went to one of them, and now she's a doctor, and she's loving life, and she's her life is exactly what you would expect. She's just crushing it. But it's those little things, it's those perceptions, and they can be a reflection on you. Maybe they're not a reflection on you, but people will just assume, because we have created a community, America, Western civilization has adopted a lot of what we do, which is all about the facade and the brush you paint with. And if it's tainted, you're tainted, and everything along with it. And that's that. And I feel like that's exactly what you're talking about. And you had a wonderful, you developed a relationship with Napoleon Hill, through his writing, that gave you a new perspective on Dale Carnegie. Because both of us, I would hazard to say, are not thrilled with the culture, aspects of the culture we live in Western society and in America. There's aspects that are amazing and wonderful, but aspects not so great.
Yep.
And those are yeah.
So I think one of my favorite aspects of living in this American anti-culture, because our culture is predominantly based on media.
Yeah.
Like, we really don't have much culture outside of borrowing everything that's popular and attributing it to society. But one of my favorite aspects of that is that primes you to be able to be a valuable misfit in society. Because if you can position yourself with an understanding of self, and you can speak to a niche who you really align with and they really align with your message, you can create subcultures of people and create movements that can actually better our society.
Amen.
In different ways here than you can anywhere else in the world.
Yes.
Because a lot of more established cultures, ones that really already know their own values, have their respect systems in place. Those are going to be harder to go against the mold unless you have already established yourself as a position of authority in whatever niche.
Right.
In the US, we still are able to create our own culture, create our own niche, and especially if that's coming from a sincere level of integrity and respect, you can help shape what this country is going to look like in 50 to 100 years.
Yeah.
But is everybody doing that? Does everybody who really has the passion and the expertise to be that leader, do they have the platform that they need right now? Or do they have limiting beliefs that society has implemented onto them that's actually holding them back from being able to create that culture within our anti-culture?
I mean, I have a buddy of mine who I think has a good message, and he's not excited about sharing that message because he's assuming that he's going to get blocked on YouTube and shadow banned on Instagram and Facebook and everything else. So he's not really interested in trying to put himself out there. Like, what? Like, you're worried that you might get shadow banned because you you want to open people's minds and get people thinking about things in a different way. And you're worried that you're going to be banned or shadow banned. So you're going to do nothing? Like, how does that make any sense?
There's a term for that. It's rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And people who are
Such a
neurodivergent,
fancy name.
absolutely. People who are neurodivergent, especially ADHD, they experience it every day. It
Yeah.
is the perceived rejection before the rejection even happens. And this can happen in relationships, it can happen in careers, it can happen on a personal level where you have already perceived the rejection. And so you don't take any steps to actually move forward with what you want to do.
Right.
Instead of already envisioning what the success is going to look like, knowing that that message isn't going to resonate with everyone. Some people will reject the message, but how many people are you going to meet who accept your message? It's so quick to think about what the absolute most negative thing that can possibly happen. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
And even our limbic system is geared towards not going towards that thing that's terrifying, because that's what saved us when there was lions hiding in the grass.
Right.
We are fine-tuned to look for danger.
Mm-hmm.
And there's situations that we don't want to put ourselves in because we perceive danger. But is there real danger in posting a TikTok that maybe a lot of people aren't going to like, but maybe a lot of the people that you do want to connect with are going to like,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to resonate with your message? That is not a lion. Your TikTok is not a lion, and your paperwork is not a lion. But when you have that somatic fear of the rejection, it can become so crippling.
Mm-hmm.
This is where mindset training really can help you in understanding that that's a perceived rejection. It's not a real rejection.
It's interesting. I mean, I like the way you go about that. My general knee-jerk reaction is, who cares? Like, so what, you're rejected. But I come from a world of acting where rejection is my job. My job is to go and be rejected 99 times before I get a thumbs up, or an approval.
Yep.
And the family that I grew up in, my parents didn't love what I did because I did it. They loved it because it was good. If it wasn't good, they told me, and they told me how bad it was and how bad I am. There was no sugarcoating. There was no, oh, we love Michael because no. Like, I had to actually perform. I actually had to, do something right to get praise of any kind. And even that was difficult. So, my mindset and how I come at things, it's like, it hurts, great. So do some more. Like, oh, you're
Yep.
scared? Awesome. Lean into it. Go get more scared. Find out how scared you can get. Like, also rock climbing, that's part of it. It's like, I have issues with heights. I haven't really figured out exactly what it is, but if I'm up high, it's almost like I feel like I'm coming out of my body or something like that. When I look, it's just like my mind just soars out over the expanse, and it makes my body feel very uneasy. But it's not a vertigo. There's no sickness. It's more euphoric. And it's, if there wasn't like, oh, if I'm not careful, my body's going to fall and probably is not going to live. If there wasn't a need to protect, it would be the most exciting, exhilarating thing in the world, because it would just be fly away. So, I love the way you're coining it and talking about it and framing it. Because, as an athlete, you have to see the victory, you have to see the win, if you're going to have it. So I'm all for that, but I'm also all for enjoying the pain and enjoying the fear and reveling in the experience, the anxiety. I had an anxiety attack once. This is maybe 10 years ago. And it was horrible. Like, I thought I was going to die. I tried going outside. I tried laying down. And then finally I was like, well, I guess this is just happening. So I was like, let's just start journaling about it. Because none of the things that I would normally do to alleviate an anxiety attack were working. So, and I started to get some alleviation as I was writing. And I was like, I don't want to come out of it right now because I'm starting to make friends with this experience. And so I then tried to lean into the anxiety, and instead of writing myself out of it, write myself deeper into it. And it was kind of psychedelic, for lack of a better word. When in doubt, use the word psychedelic, because I kind of feel like it's fits so many different scenarios. But yeah, I mean, I know that's not in everyone's bag of tricks to lean into the pain and lean into the fear and lean into the anxiety and really experience it and feel it. But it can be. And I kind of think it should be, because I think that's who we were, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 years ago. We had to eat, we had to figure it out, and we couldn't afford to be paralyzed, where I feel like now everyone's just paralyzed with fear and anxiety and depression and everything else.
I think a lot of it has to do with, especially over the last 3 generations, when we start to track emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
We're not really taught to feel our emotions. We're not taught to name our emotions. We're not taught to sit with our emotions. It's really prevalent in, like, Gen X is a very interesting one to look at, because that was a very feral group of kids that were being raised who they weren't really given a whole lot of opportunities to have much guidance emotionally and having that security in their emotions.
Yeah. We had to find it for ourselves. I'm Gen X. I was born in 76. So you find it for yourself, or you don't find it at all. Good luck.
But even if you're looking at the school system and some of the housing culture that we see, where a lot of kids are growing up in now, you still see some of those patterns from Gen X to millennials to Gen Z, and then, like, my kids are Generation Alpha. The lack of being able to connect with our emotions, being able to have the acceptance and permission to feel our emotions, leads to a lot of people not wanting to live up to their potential and just staying right at that mediocrity in life, because that is a comfortable baseline where nobody's really going to ask you too many questions. Nobody's going to notice you too much, and you don't have to deal with uncomfortable emotions. But if you want to excel and get even a slice above mediocre in life, one of the first things that you really have to do is learn how to feel your emotions, learn how to name them, learn that your emotions and your emotional responses are a really good indicator that you are ignoring something important that you need to work on. And some of that is trauma. Some of that is just some rewiring that you have to do to get out of that mediocre way of thinking. So one of my favorite practices personally is I love being triggered. I love getting into situations where I have that emotional response of like, oh my God, you're so wrong. And this is why. Because if I'm having that sort of emotional response, that is a marker for a scar on my soul. And it needs to be uncovered.
Yeah.
So why is that happening? Why is this so triggering? Is this because my body's remembering a moment where I felt this same type of way? Or is this person's perception so drastically different? And for some reason, I have the need to tell them that they're wrong. Is that my place? Absolutely not. But after these moments of being triggered, I'll usually go and journal and I'll write out the entire scenario and I'll write out how I felt. I won't use words specifically for the emotions. Like I'm not going to put in, I was triggered today.
Right.
But I will put in, I had a conversation today that made my face feel hot and this cinching in my chest and this fire in my throat. And I was angry, like very, very, very angry. And being able to name the experience, putting into perspective or perception, like this is my reaction, this is how my emotions feel,
right?
And then putting a name to it. Then you can also dig a little bit deeper because your body is going to remember those emotions better than it's going to remember every time that I'm angry.
The somatic experience is so much more powerful than any other type of memory or it's that's one of the reasons why I feel like all forms of therapy have to have some sort of physical component. Really, like I don't know that any psychological practice. I mean, there are psychologists that will use dance movement, but I think it's a foregone conclusion. It's in our body. Like our bodies are historical records of all of our trauma and pain and everything, whether we realize it or not.
But the way to take the power away from that so that you're more free in the future is to find more of those moments where you have felt that way. So by going even just through journaling, just being like, oh yeah, this reminds me of this time when I was a teenager when this terrible thing happened, or this terrible thing that happened to me when I was a kid. It's the same feelings. And being able to actually do some healing in that respect and validating those feelings, letting yourself really feel them, even laying quietly and just allowing yourself to feel. It can work its way out.
I think this is kind of amazing because you're ping, 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 thousand things to bring up and talk about. Which one's going to win? You said in the last few generations, this emotional intelligence, and now you're bringing it into the body, and how this history and your ability to have an emotional intelligence really lies within the body. So I don't know how I know you, so I know you're going to go there, but let's I guess let's just find out. As I'm pinging around of different ways of coming about this, there are ancient practices that Western society shits on, but it's starting to go, oh, wait, there might be something to this. And we look at like the Ayurvedic or the Vedic traditions, which incorporates Ayurvedic and a lot of other elements. In China, came out acupuncture, acupressure. In some of the mystery religions, they talk about the body. Even in Catholicism, there's still a taking of the body of Christ, taking communion. And I feel like if you look at, instead of saying this is mysticism, and instead of saying, chakras, as I understand it from yogis that I've heard talk, say the chakra system is in the colors and the patterns are used really more for imagination and to create an awareness, an imagined awareness. It's like, drawing something, so you can better understand something. So they create these, they're real centers. They say they're real centers, but the color and everything else is very specifically having to do to help you focus and to help you better imagine what the experience is. And I've heard people say very specifically over and over and over again, and psychologists talk about this, other therapists and other, that if someone gets shut down, they can't speak, they'll feel pain in their throat, and they'll, in some form or another, or if they've been, as a child, they weren't allowed to speak, or they were abused, but made to be quiet about it. There are certain things they just can't speak, they can't say, and freeing their throat allows them to speak, and it allows them to heal, in that type of suppression and oppression and subjugation in some times. So are we saying, because so many other powerful, successful people talk about, freeing their body and doing this journaling and feeling the pain and leaning into the anxiety and all the other things you and I are talking about, are we saying that once upon a time we knew better, and we're just trying to rediscover that in this modern era?
I think in a lot of ways, we were less distracted. We didn't have the same 24-hour stimulation that took us away from the reality that we really live in. Did we still have storylines? Did we still have families that maybe didn't create the best environment for us? Did we have peers that didn't create the best environment for us? I'm sure that is something that's happened throughout time. But in terms of the distractibility from self, at least in recorded history, I don't see how we can compare what we're going through now and trying to find self with the amount of distractions, the amount of societal pressure, the amount of peer pressure, to what humans were experiencing farther back in time. And I'm not the authority to speak on exactly how we went from one understanding to the understanding that we have now.
Yeah.
What I am more of an authority that I can speak on is understanding how to limit the distractions that we have now so that we can refocus on our body, so that we can refocus on our mind. And I think a lot of these ancient teachings, even as science starts to catch up in a lot of ways, we are seeing that acupressure, acupuncture, the meridian lines actually do track with the lymphatic system.
Yep.
Which then you can also see where the ailments are popping up. And even on an emotional level, like you were saying before, in traditional Chinese medicine, it said that grief is held in the gallbladder.
Mm-hmm.
And through acupressure, acupuncture, you can start to target some of these areas of congestion. And maybe some of it too is that our bodies will go into different positions based on our emotional feelings.
Yeah.
You can even see some body language with kids who are abused and then bad posture as an adult because you're shut down.
Mm-hmm.
You're in this protective mechanism. And even that can have an effect on the way that you think, because your body is connected to the way that you're going to perceive mentally.
Yeah.
If you're stuck with this frontline tension just pulling you in as if you're the scared black cat that you see on Halloween, your mentality might be more geared towards fear, which is also going to start compressing your abdomen.
Mm-hmm.
It can also cause more compression on internal organs, such as your gallbladder. And when you're not approaching a healthy mind with also an understanding of a healthy body, you're going to end up having kind of like these phoenix moments where you're still chained.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can burn bright and you can burn fast and you can create something beautiful, but you're still chained down. So you're going to extinguish just as fast.
Yeah.
You can build around a good mindset, but unless you're actually dealing with what you're holding in your body, the storylines that you're living by in your mind, and reintegrating, you're not setting yourself up for real happiness. You're not setting yourself up for real ambition in life. You're masking it so that you can get to some goal, but you might fall right back into the same patterns.
You so perfectly took a bunch of ancient ideas and made them very practical, as far as like the cat and the fear and the gallbladder and everything else, and how we deal with our bodies, and translated it to kind of real situation here and now, which I just love. Part of me wants to I don't have a lineage. I'm not a religious person. My dad was an atheist, so I don't have any of that lineage. But at the same token, I have all of the lineage because I get to study everything and look at everything and not be tied to anything. And so part of me, wants to just grab on this, and like, look, does this work for you? No. Okay. Grab on this, look at, and when, we're able to look at things in just a more pragmatic way, it's like, are your health issues tied to your emotions? Absolutely. Are your health issues tied to, or is your success tied to your emotions and your health? Yeah, absolutely. Like everything is connected to everything else. And it's hidden in modern wisdom. It's hidden in ancient wisdom. It's hidden in every single religion, every spiritual practice. And I feel like, your explanation just now was a perfect way to kind of tie it in just a very simple, matter of fact if you've been abused, you're feeling scared or drawn, you're going to be more within yourself. That's also going to cause other spinal issues and other organ issues are not going to be working, so you're not going to be as healthy. It's, I don't know. I just really enjoy when it all kind of connects and comes together like that. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. I feel like the more that you are able to research as much as possible, a greater understanding of nature, of yourself, even of business, spirituality, optimal health, whether you're a myohacker or a biohacker, doesn't matter. You see a common theme,
Mm-hmm.
and that there is no real duality. There is a singularity where everything really is connected.
Yeah.
And I get kind of away from like the idea of sheer oneness, but everything really is connected. And
Inextricably.
the more that you're able to recognize that just being and embracing your environment and taking in information without too much prejudice, without too much scrutiny of thought, you can see the patterns and you can start to have a much easier time recognizing what is going to be a healthy next step for you, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's something with your body, something with your diet, something with your mind, something about your environment. They're all going to play a big factor. But if you're more focused on just one thing,
Mm-hmm.
if you think that just one thing is the reason life isn't going your way, and for a lot of people, usually that one thing is money, which is outside of self. If I have more money, I'll be happier.
Mm-hmm.
If I have more money, I can buy the things that I need to be healthier. If I have more money, I'll have more time to be able to actually take care of myself. Instead of looking inwards and appreciating the environment that you're in and working within that environment and taking care of your environment, you put the pressure on something that is outside of yourself.
It's so funny coming back to the ADHD, because ADHD, it's not that we can't focus. It's not that we can't focus on one thing. However, we do have a propensity to want to focus and spend time with a lot of different things. And as they pop up, we're gonna go and deal with them. And to some extent, Western society in the last several decades has become increasingly focused. Like when Galileo, I don't know. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. When he was a mathematician and a spiritualist and a million other things, he was that because there were no hyper focus there. You're just not locked into one thing. So maybe he had ADHD, maybe everyone had ADHD, maybe no one had it, maybe there was no need for it because you could kind of do everything, you didn't have to be pigeonholed. Where society now, you have to go to college, you have to pick out a major, you can do maybe a minor, maybe two minors, and then you need to go to grad school and get even more focused, and you need to go to get your doctorate and be even more focused. And then you have to have a specialty within your focus. And then you have to, you know what I mean? It's just narrowing down. I don't know that there's anything natural about that. And I don't know that it's helpful to anyone at large for anyone to be that hyper focused and not really take in other things. And I'm starting to wonder, because I've just had, you don't do this, and most of your friends and my friends, not that they know each other necessarily, probably don't do this either. But I used to, like, anytime someone said, "Oh, I have ADHD," and they were using it as an excuse, I just want to be like, "Go fuck yourself," because that's not an excuse. Like, you're just using that as an excuse because you don't want to deal with something. Like, plenty of people have ADHD. One of my friends who has ADHD has multiple doctorates. Like, you're an incredibly successful entrepreneur and a mother and a wife and a daughter. I mean, like, there's no limitations to what ADHD people can do unless they put limits on themselves or what they're capable of focusing on. But it gets me to that question of perhaps now I'm starting to think it really is a superpower. It really is an advantage, because we will never be locked into just thinking about money and getting hung up and continue to degrade on one thing, because our minds are just, well, I'm curious in this now. Go do this for a little bit. What's your feeling about that?
Well, if you look at education, I'm gonna hyper focus on the education part right now.
Sure.
Our education system is actually relatively new in the United States. It was borrowed from, oh my gosh, I can't remember exactly which country, but our education system is actually based off of a idea of learning that was going to create factory workers and soldiers. And originally we used to have just one room schoolhouses, mixed ages, and topics were taught, but it was still a Socratic method of learning.
Mm-hmm.
With that Socratic method of learning, you're bringing together multiple perspectives
Mm-hmm.
and asking questions and repeating those questions back, usually so that the person who initially asked the question can find the answer themselves through the entire network within the schoolhouse. Instead of being fed an answer and told to memorize it, it was more about critical thinking. And that historically what Socrates and Plato both believed was education.
Mm-hmm.
It was creating a positive environment for learning, sharing thought, perspective, and education.
Mm-hmm.
By asking questions, receiving aspects of answers, but mostly asking yourself if those are the right answers based on the information that you're receiving. Our schooling now is drastically different from that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is, if you look at it, meant to make factory workers and soldiers. And factory workers at this point can be pretty interchangeable. It just can be
Cogs in a machine.
cogs in a machine.
Yeah.
Exactly. Our society is not designed to build people. It's not designed to build freedom of thought and this ability to have a possession of your cognitive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Our society is built around building people to build society.
Mm-hmm.
And we are seeing a lot of pushback with the schooling systems now. We're also seeing an incredible amount of push for unschooling and homeschooling models
Mm-hmm.
that really do cater to the Socratic method.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of ways that this can be taken advantage of, but there's still a lot of ways that this can actually be a really, really, really beautiful thing for humanity moving forward. because it will create more people who are able to have the freedom to let their hyper focus, especially if they're ADHD, run its course.
Yeah.
When they just grit into a topic and they learn everything that they possibly can about that topic until they reach their fulfilled level of mastery with that topic.
Mm-hmm.
And then they move on to the next. That sounds more like fulfilled learning and real learning than just being fed the same topic in a class for an entire semester, testing out of it and forgetting everything because you didn't give a shit about that topic anyways.
Yep.
If you have passion, you'll retain the information.
Yep.
If you don't have passion, then you're going to do everything that you possibly can to shut down your brain, learn the information, regurgitate it back, and move on as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of people even live their lives now.
Oh, yeah. I think that's how most people live their lives. I think what's interesting, though, is the system of education has been around for a few decades or several decades. But the oppressiveness of that machine has reached, I don't have kids, so, and you're enough younger than me that you don't remember, you weren't in school when I was, but when I was in school, kids didn't get medicated. It was really rare in the 80s that someone was getting medicated. It was extremely rare. And nowadays it's extremely common. And the reason why I think it's extremely common is because our society and these rigid rules and this idea of what focus is, and this idea of, what the system is to, create these good cogs and these good middle management, because middle management is a factory worker. It's the modern day factory worker. And because things have become social media, communications, media have shed such a light on what's going on, it's easier to see what the culture is, and it's easier to define what the culture is, and it's easier to then put people in boxes and then say you've got to be medicated. And that, is a fairly recent phenomenon. Like, I have no idea the kids that got medicated in the early 80s or in the 70s. I don't know if they really needed it. I have no idea, but I know the circumstances were vastly different than they are today. Now, if you can't stay focused for 5 minutes, in one class, one time, well, they need medication. And it's tragic to me, because I think that I mean, I don't know, I'd just say it. I think the only answer is we've got to get off the medication completely, and we've got to say the system is broken, and anyone it's not working for, here's another school. Like, I would love to have a school for children where they actually get to be children, and they actually get to learn how to learn, and they get to really be excited about, whatever it is, because all children are sponges. All children want to learn. That's what we're here to do. Like, there's no way around it. Like, what other animal has such a long gestation period? Yeah. What other animal has to rely on others? Like, we're not, I've said this before in other episodes. And this is something that is incredibly important for people to understand. We're not tribal by nature. We are survivalists by nature. Tribalism is just the easiest method for survival, period. That's it. And so, and there are different types of tribalism, and there's different types of communal organizations, and how we organize is is a survival mechanism, and it's either going to be beneficial for the individual to survive, or it's not. If it's not, then it doesn't work and it won't last. And then the larger community of humans, all these different survival techniques are going to push against each other because,
Yeah.
I
want to go back
yeah,
a little bit to some of what you were saying about nobody really being medicated in the 80s or early to mid 80s versus where we are now.
yeah,
So when like ADHD, that diagnosis is still fairly new in terms of like obviously the track of
ADD, and then it became ADHD recently.
Well, yes and no. When I was growing up, there was a distinction. There was ADD and then ADHD. The only real difference was they said ADD was attention deficit disorder. Just, you can't really focus. Maybe you're falling behind in school. ADHD was something that, especially in the 90s, was said that only boys had, because that's where the hyperactivity came from.
Funny, I have no recollection of that.
Hyperactivity disorder. And they believed that the inability to have any attention on anything came from their hyperactivity. And thankfully, that idea has predominantly died.
That's
because
good.
we have a lot more information now about ADHD, about brain chemistry, about dopamine levels that just weren't well researched, especially when I was growing up. I think the only real medication that was out there for ADHD was Ritalin when I was a kid. And
that was the only medication for the longest time. It's an amphetamine.
Yeah. But somebody who actually has ADHD, they're going to have a very different reaction to amphetamines than somebody who doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at millennials, like we kind of were the test dummies in a lot of ways when we were kids for the pharmaceutical company. For many,
not kind of. You guys were. The millennials were the test dummies for the pharmaceutical companies.
Yes, but with that too, a lot of millennials now, I believe, have a greater appreciation for medications that actually work and the research behind certain medications, because we were able to see it from the very beginning and how terrible it was.
Yeah.
To where now there's a greater understanding of brain chemistry. There's a greater understanding of these neurological, I don't want to say deficiencies, but neurological issues that can be addressed in ways that do help your life. I know people who have ADHD and depression who, without their medications, they do have a really hard time, a harder time than they should. Could they do the work to surpass everything that's going on within them? Yes, maybe, but it might take away so much of their time with their kids, their time with their business, their time with their spouse, their time with their friends, that maybe it's not even worth it for them to do those 5 years of work to be unmedicated versus knowing that they can take their ADHD medication or they can take their antidepressants and still feel and be present. And I think that's really incredible because it empowers people in ways that we didn't have empowerment like that in the early 90s and the 80s.
Sure.
So I think medication is a wonderful thing for a lot of people.
I think it can be. I just think it's also, it's a bridge. And, bridges are important.
Yeah.
they may not always be necessary, but they can be incredibly valuable and incredibly important. And especially for a society that is so distant from truth, from authenticity, and the idea that, you're going to tell someone after 20 years of beating their authenticity out of them, now they just have to immediately pop back into it and be okay with it. And you don't get any help. You don't get any medication. You don't get anything else. It's like that's tragic in and of itself. So I do think that those things are amazing, wonderful. However, it'd be nice maybe if the future generation didn't have to go through what the millennials went through, so that maybe they're not as medicated.
And I don't think that they are. Like, the medical community, from what I've seen, is a lot more compassionate, especially with children. My son, we finally went the route of diagnosis over the summer. And I had my suspicions about him having ADHD, but I couldn't tell initially if that was me projecting onto him my experiences from when I was growing up and not being understood. So we waited to really give him that understanding of ADHD until after he was diagnosed. So over the summer, we went through the entire gambit of finally getting the diagnosis for our son. And as soon as we got it, yes, like 100% ADHD combined type. And that may change when he's older. But for now, combined type, which led us on a very interesting journey, because I wanted to see what was going to happen once we got into that funnel system. Like, once we had the paperwork, once the doctors knew us, what was that going to look like now? And the first thing that his doctor had said was, there's new apps for kids who have ADHD that actually teaches them cognitive behavioral therapy. And some of them, they're actually wearing a heart monitor sleeve, and they're seeing really good results.
Heart rate variability is an amazing tool now. I mean, it's so amazing, these biofeedback mechanisms. So it's amazing that your doctor's helping with that. I'm so happy to hear that.
But I'm hearing this more and more from so many other parents who also have kids who are neurodivergent, that medication is not the first thing that's being pushed. It's actually working on the environment, working on the communication, educating your kid about ADHD or about their beautiful concoction of neurodiversity. And if medication is needed, we can have that conversation.
That's awesome.
We actually almost did, because we went through a massive upheaval in September and October. And I could see the effects on our son. Like, he was having meltdowns where he was going into full lizard brain. Like, he was not human anymore. He was losing it. And it was because his environment was so chaotic at that point. There was no consistency. There wasn't very much compassion to what he was going through. And then add the neurodivergent level to it. And that's an overstimulating, very emotional time that you don't have any context for. So your body just goes into like full cortisol release. And we thought about actually getting him medicated at that point, just to help him through that transition. Talking with the doctor, she agreed. She was like, I think it would be really beneficial. It might not fully kick in for about 3 months, but depending how long this transition is, we might be able to get him on medication for just a short amount of time, like 6 months to a year, so that his brain can learn about what that baseline looks like and then start to wean him off of it. But we would only do that if there's good communication, if he
That's
wants
amazing.
it, if the parents are okay with it. But doctors now are taking a much more human approach to really facilitating healing instead of just being like, this pill will fix this. Like, the pill doesn't fix it.
No.
But maybe the environment that you have around the understanding that this medication can be beneficial and either show you that it's helpful, or that now you have kind of that marker about what that feels like, what that looks like, and then you can wean yourself off of it still with the memories.
I mean, like you said, that the medication can teach him how to experience what his goal is, his end goal is. And that's something that, I learned, self-medicating, but not having kids and not having going through what you're going through, I had no idea that the mainstream doctors are finally getting this, because the only people I've ever come across that talk about this are all fringe people. They're all doing their own things, or they're in, or they're new fringe studies. So the fact that your family doctor is on that mindset is amazing and wonderful. Like that's just really awesome. And it's very hopeful for the rest of the world too, or for the rest of, our community in America, because that should proliferate, I would think, so that other kids are getting the same experience.
I would hope so. And I mean, my experience, I have been really happy with. We ended up actually not medicating our son. Instead, because we've always had this open dialogue with him.
Yeah.
And I get to be his advocate. I get to really let him know, I have ADHD too. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's why I do this. Sometimes that's why I do this. Sometimes that's why I have these weird systems set in place. Mm-hmm. But I'm able to talk to him about it. That's awesome. Not every kid is going to have an advocate within their house who's going to be open and honest about, well, why do you flip your vitamins upside down before you put them in the pantry? It's like, well, I flipped them upside down so that I can remember if I took them this morning or not, and don't take them another time because my brain offloaded that information.
Yep.
Or why do I have so many alarms set on my phone? Mm-hmm. Because I'm time blind. There will be moments throughout the day where I think that it took me 20 minutes to do something and it's been 4 hours.
Right.
So not every household is going to look the same way, and not every doctor is going to approach ADHD the same way, but it does lead to a more hopeful view of the future the more that doctors maintain this mentality that medication is not always the right answer. And I hope that many other parents are able to be an advocate for their kid, whether they're neurodivergent or not, and being able to really shed a lot more compassion for their kids' growth mentally than what was given to millennials or Gen X.
I mean, that's so amazing and hopeful. And I mean, ultimately, the parents like yourselves, you and your husband are, are a large push behind that, if they know that they need to be pushing for it. And hopefully more parents, hopefully, parents will listen to this and hear that and go, oh, wait, I can do something else for my kid, because heart rate variability is not widely talked about. So maybe in their community, they've not heard of it. Just to recall, and this maybe will help us wrap up this first go around. You talked early on, so long ago at the beginning of the conversation, about the hypnagogic states Have you been able to teach him any of that? Has that been something that he has shown any interest in?
Well, children's brain development is obviously very different than when we're comparing it to an adult. Their ability to be in the present moment and to have nonstop creative thoughts, I mean, that is kind of their baseline right now.
Being a child, yeah.
Yeah. Adults crave that. Our brain craves that childlike creativity. The hypnagogic state is probably very similar to what kids under 10 are experiencing all the time. So, teaching kids how to recognize emotions, naming them and feeling them might help them to better understand their present moment. But kids are already living in that present moment in ways that adults are not.
That makes sense to me. The reason why I ask and the reason why I bring it back up, aside from the fact that, I don't want to, you've been with me for so long, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, and we can always do a round 2 down the road. But the reason why I thought it might be apropos is because if he's getting stuck, or if any individual of any age is getting stuck in an emotional state of mind or being, then they're not open to the larger imaginative world, or the, that hypnagogic state of kind of somewhere between waking and dreaming. And my thought was, if there's techniques that you have, and maybe this is not apropos at all, but the reason why I brought it up is because if there's techniques that you have to get into that state, then that might be the technique that gets him out of the
lizard brain moments.
Yeah. If he's able to
cognitively get there,
or you're able to help him have a trigger to get there. Like, remember that training, remember that, try that right now. And then he does it. I have no idea. I'm just curious if it would work, or if yeah.
It kind of depends on the situation and where they're at with their mental development. If you can imagine, you have an upstairs brain and a downstairs brain, and
Sure.
you can understand that there are levels to get from one side to the other. You are able to go from the emotional response to the logical response.
Mm-hmm.
You're able to climb that ladder between lower brain and upper brain. Kids' brains don't have a fully formed ladder yet. They don't have the understanding of the difference between the emotional and the logical. They don't have that connection. So when you are noticing that in their present state, something is really agitating them, they're hyper-focused on whatever that emotion is, or that situation that's making them feel angry or upset or not heard. I mean, not many parents can do this. I don't do it as often as I wish I was capable of. Catching it before it goes into that emotional state.
Right.
Catching that moment where you can still help them build that ladder.
Right. Okay.
But it's a very, very, very fine point that sometimes you don't even recognize is staring you in the face until an emotional response, a tantrum.
Right.
And I mean, those are normal. Like, tantrums and emotional outbursts for kids are completely normal.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's part of the brain development, part of the emotional and psychological development.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't think that there's any way around it from a developmental standpoint. But it's interesting the way you put it. The ladder, you're still building the ladder at age 10. And because there's certain functions that aren't possible. Like, they literally aren't possible. Like, I mean, like, if you just look at another animal, like, dogs are not capable of rationalizing anything. They're just not capable of it. But a child isn't capable of rationalizing either at a certain age. And then at some point in time, they can start rationalizing. So that's a neurological development thing. That's the brain just isn't capable of it at a certain point, and then all of a sudden it is.
Well, I think validation is one of the key components for helping somebody understand the emotional and the logical.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're having that emotional experience, whether it's a tantrum, anger, whatever, having somebody actually validate those feelings for you, and while you're experiencing them, not trying to speak logic to you.
Yeah.
Not sitting there going, oh, well, you're just mad because of blah, blah, blah. Well, your next step is this, while they're having the tantrum. Instead, just holding space and validating them.
Yeah. Logic and emotions don't go real well together.
Not too much. But, that's another aspect of mindfulness. Because if they're in that moment, it's not necessarily about fixing it. It's about helping them work through it in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think a lot of adults now are trying to figure out. How can they validate their own feelings and be safe in it so that they can process it the right way? Because I'm sure a lot of us who have experienced childhood trauma and we're still working through some of that inner child work, that's probably one of the main components that we're most confused about. Like, what does it look like to actually have our feelings validated? What does it look like to not try to speak logic to yourself when really all you need to do is just feel something and feel validated in that experience alone, and to grow from that?
God, I know we need to wrap this up because I've taken up so much of your time.
Sorry.
But no, this is amazing. I mean, we could continue talking for another several hours, I'm sure. My final thought, and then I want you to, respond to this in whatever way. So adults, like especially over the age of, let's say, 35, maybe over 40. I feel like a lot of them have just given up on ever thinking they're going to get that emotional validation or be seen in certain ways. And they don't even think about it, like, oh yeah, that would be nice to be seen that way or feel that way. And I feel like now is a time where men are finally allowed to cry. Women are able to share their, older women over the age of 40 are able to share experiences that, when they were 20, they were not allowed to share. It was not okay for them to share. So I feel like men and women, and I'm just arbitrarily saying 40. I don't know what the actual, maybe it's 50, maybe it's 20. I don't know. But I feel like now is a time where we can have that self-talk of like, what do I need validating in? And where do I get it? And then being okay with actually getting it. Because I know how hard that can be, to hear that you're okay in feeling something, or you're okay in, or being like, I've always had a problem with people telling me, like, when I do something good, I'm like, yeah, okay, great. You give me praise and $2 will get me a cup of coffee, maybe. Like, I don't even know if it'll buy me coffee anymore. So like, I know how hard it is, and I'm just kind of maybe we can end it there on how do you see that playing out in this, moving forward, and finding that culture we want, to have, this open culture we want to have?
Okay, I'm trying to think of how to not elaborate too much to where it leads to more questions.
Maybe we just leave it a cliffhanger. We'll pick this up in a couple months. We'll do it again.
My gut instinct and how I want to preface this is, since I am not over 35, my answer to this is going to be very objective,
Okay.
because I'm coming from a space of understanding now versus what it actually looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen examples of people even in their 60s,
Yeah.
able to start doing some personal development work where they are going back and doing some love on that inner child and
Mm-hmm.
doing the shadow work that they need to free up their minds and really live a no nonsense life.
Mm-hmm.
And no nonsense to them can be like, well, I was told not to do this when I was a kid. I realize that's just somebody else's perception. It's not mine. I'm going to do this. I don't really care. And allowing themselves that self-love and that freedom to express themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that journey is not fun. I think a lot of people hit between kind of two different allegories. The allegory of the phoenix, where they have gone through so much in their life. They may finally hit this rock bottom state where everything has gone wrong. Their environment is toxic. Their own thoughts are toxic. They've lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
But they have this ignition moment within themselves to reclaim their life and to really blossom into the person that they know fundamentally they can be.
Mm-hmm.
And that phoenix journey, I think, is where a lot of people start to really want to look inwards. They want to repair that relationship with themselves. They want to not forgive, but they want to accept what had happened to them when they were younger, or that they have done to other people that maybe they're holding on to a lot of guilt for. The phoenix journey we see play out a lot with public figures, authors, artists, movie stars, whatever.
Yep.
You see the past of trauma and toxicity, and then you read about the rock bottom moment, and then you get to really hear about how they took that energy and they transmuted it from something that was extremely negative into something that was their fuel of positivity moving forward. But on the other side, there's Plato's cave allegory. And Plato,
I don't think I know Plato's cave allegory, or at least not by that name.
The story is, there's a group of people that are chained in a cave, all facing the same wall. And they're given no context to what is happening around them other than they are chained, and they're trying to figure out what these shadows are on the wall of the people dancing against the fire behind them. And that is their frame of focus. They're creating stories, myths, understanding of life based on these shadows on the wall, which means every single one of them is experiencing this moment. Every single one of them may find some grain of truth about their reality and then sharing it with the rest. But how many of them are actually turning around? How many of them are actually gaining context? How many of them are stuck in fear of these shadows versus trying to reach outside of themselves for greater understanding? And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. Even if you look at social media, who has time to work on themselves when you're constantly looking at these other shadows of people and throwing context at them.
Yeah.
Your journey has to kind of be what you make of it. And if you want a better life, if you want to be really happy, if you want to feel true connection, you're going to have to first understand that connection with yourself, which means doing that work, working through those narratives and going that Phoenix journey.
Yeah.
If you're okay with being chained down and you're okay with only sharing the same stories with your neighbors about this context, that's okay too. But
I love that you said that. I love that you said that it's okay, because I mean, I do think it's okay, especially if you're 70 years old and this is the world you lived in, and you've made your peace with this and you're okay with that. Like like you said, it can be so scary to go like this. So like just having you say that that's okay, I just love that. That's just so amazing.
yeah.
I feel like we could just keep on going, but let's end it there. We'll come back and we'll do another session at some point in time.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for your time. Don't forget to leave a comment or a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts. New episodes every Tuesday, and short clips from each episode are on YouTube. Thank you. Until next time, don't forget, your life story is yours to write and rewrite as many times as you want.